Episode 118, The Cancer Cure Conspiracy. What is the pharmaceutical industry hiding? Welcome back to the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. Cancer kills approximately 10 million people worldwide every year. It is the second leading cause of death globally, and it has been the subject of one of the most persistent, most emotionally resonant, and most widely believed conspiracy theories in modern history. The theory holds that a cure for cancer already exists, that it has been found, possibly multiple times, by multiple researchers, and that it has been suppressed by pharmaceutical companies who profit enormously from treating cancer rather than curing it. The logic is straightforward and to many people feels intuitively correct. A cured patient stops spending money on treatment. A patient in ongoing treatment keeps spending indefinitely. And the global cancer treatment industry is worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Tonight we examine the financial logic, the specific cases cited as evidence, and what the documented record actually shows. Detailed explanation. The cancer cure conspiracy theory has been circulating in various forms for over a century. The British government made it illegal to advertise cancer treatments or cures in 1939, partly in response to the prevalence of fraudulent remedy claims. The basic emotional architecture of the theory has not changed. A helpless patient, a greedy industry, a hidden answer. What has changed is the scale of the industry. Global cancer drug revenue exceeded $250 billion annually by 2025. Major pharmaceutical companies invest heavily in cancer research, and those investments generate enormous returns from treatments that manage rather than eliminate the disease. The financial structure is real. The question is what it implies. A 2014 survey found that 37% of the American public believed the FDA intentionally suppressed natural cures for cancer at the behest of pharmaceutical companies. This is not a fringe belief. It is held by more than a third of the population. Core elements of the theory. The first element is the financial incentive argument. Cancer treatment is one of the most profitable sectors in the pharmaceutical industry. Chemotherapy, targeted therapies, immunotherapies, and supportive care medications generate revenue across decades of patient treatment. A one-time cure that eliminated the ongoing treatment revenue stream would be financially devastating to the companies that depend on it. Believers argue that this incentive is sufficient to explain why a cure has not been announced, not because one does not exist, but because the people who find it have financial reasons not to disclose it. The second element is the specific cases cited as suppressed cures. A number of compounds and treatments have been cited over the years as potential cancer cures that were buried by pharmaceutical interests. These include dichloroacetate, a cheap, unpatentable compound that showed anti-tumor effects in laboratory studies, but received limited clinical trial funding. Researchers who published positive results in 2007 noted that because DCA is not patentable, pharmaceutical companies had no financial incentive to fund the large clinical trials required for approval. They were not claiming suppression. They were identifying a structural problem with how research is prioritized. But the story was widely interpreted as evidence of deliberate suppression. The third element is the unpatentable compound argument. Some potentially effective treatments are not pursued to market because they cannot be patented, meaning no company can recoup the investment in clinical trials through exclusive sales rights. This is a documented structural feature of pharmaceutical research incentives. It is not the same as active suppression, but it does mean that some potentially effective compounds receive less research attention than patentable ones. Critics argue this is a form of passive suppression through resource allocation. The fourth element is the researcher death and disappearance narrative. Periodically, stories circulate about researchers working on cancer cures who die unexpectedly or under suspicious circumstances. In 2024, social media posts claimed that Leonardo Ferreira, described as a cancer researcher close to a breakthrough, had been killed in a plane crash. Ferreira subsequently confirmed he was alive. Nobody of that name was on the aircraft's passenger list. The incident illustrates how the narrative generates and sustains itself regardless of factual accuracy. evidence for and against the evidence against a coordinated suppression of a universal cancer cure is substantial and comes from several directions. The most important is the nature of cancer itself. Cancer is not a single disease. It is over 200 distinct diseases, each with its own genetic profile, behavior, and response to treatment. The idea of a single cure that works for all cancers reflects a misunderstanding of the biological complexity involved. Researchers are not hiding a magic bullet. They are working on an enormously complex biological problem that has resisted decades of intensive global research effort. The scale of coordination required is also a serious challenge. Oxford researcher David Grimes estimated that suppressing a cancer cure involving only the largest pharmaceutical companies would require at least 714,000 people who knew something and were maintaining silence. This figure does not include academic researchers, government scientists, regulatory officials, or health journalists, all of whom would need to be part of the conspiracy. Research conducted at universities, independent research institutes, and government agencies worldwide is not financially controlled by pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies have also approved and marketed treatments that substantially reduce cancer revenues, including vaccines that prevent HPV-related cervical cancer. The HPV vaccine, widely adopted globally, prevents cancers that would otherwise generate substantial treatment revenues. Companies chose to develop and market it regardless. The evidence for the structural problem, that research priorities are influenced by patentability and profit, is more credible. This is acknowledged by independent researchers and health policy analysts. Unpatentable compounds do receive less clinical trial investment. Treatments for rare cancers affecting small patient populations receive less investment than treatments for common cancers. These are genuine and documented inadequacies in the pharmaceutical research model. Arguments in favor believers argue that the structural problem and the active suppression argument are not as distinct as critics suggest. If the research system consistently fails to develop and bring to market compounds that cannot generate profits, even when those compounds show genuine promise, the practical effect is suppression, whether or not it involves deliberate concealment. The opioid crisis demonstrated that pharmaceutical companies are capable of knowingly causing harm at enormous scale when financial incentives align. Why, believers ask, should cancer be different? They also point to the genuine cases where promising research received inadequate follow-up due to funding structures rather than scientific failure. The DCA example is real. The structural underinvestment in treatments for rare and pediatric cancers is real. The gap between what is scientifically possible and what receives adequate funding is real. Arguments against cancer researchers argue that the conspiracy theory causes direct, measurable harm. Patients who believe an effective cure is being hidden from them are more likely to pursue unregulated alternative treatments and less likely to pursue proven therapies with established survival benefits. Research published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute found that cancer patients who used alternative medicine as a primary treatment had significantly lower survival rates than those who used conventional treatment. They also note that the people working on cancer research are not an abstraction. They are individuals who have lost family members to cancer, who chose their careers out of genuine motivation to address the disease, and who are not engaged in a collective conspiracy to suppress the findings they spend their lives pursuing. Public opinion and broader impact, the cancer cure conspiracy theory persists because it speaks to something real, a distrust of pharmaceutical industry motives that has been substantiated in other contexts, and a grief at the scale of cancer deaths that makes the idea of a hidden solution emotionally easier to bear than the alternative. The alternative, that cancer is genuinely one of the most complex biological challenges in medicine, that 10 million people die from it each year despite enormous global effort, and that the answer has not been found not because it is hidden, but because it is genuinely difficult, is a harder truth to hold. Conclusion: is the pharmaceutical industry hiding a cancer cure? The documented evidence points to a structural problem. Research incentives that inadequately fund unpatentable compounds and under-resourced conditions, rather than active suppression of a working universal cure. For believers, the financial logic and the pattern of industry behavior in other contexts make deliberate suppression plausible. For researchers and oncologists, the biological complexity of cancer and the scale of global research effort make the suppression hypothesis implausible and damaging to the patients who act on it. What is certain is this: 10 million people die from cancer every year. The research system has genuine structural inadequacies. And no single cure for all cancers has been found, not because it is hidden, but because cancer itself is not one thing. This is the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. If tonight's episode made you think, please rate and follow on Spotify. Tomorrow on the Conspiracy Theory Analyst, is the music industry using frequencies to manipulate emotions? That's next.